sociopath is basically clinically obsolete. They don't use it anymore. But that's not what I was diagnosed with. So rather than retroactively change it, I kept it as sociopath. But it's really been interesting sort of sharing with people the nuance of sociopathy and psychopathy. To be clear, there are extreme versions of my personality type who have, in large part, earned that, ugly reputation. But what I was trying to share in this book is that sociopathy is more than the worst extreme examples. And if we are able to catch it early, research indicates that it's really, really receptive to treatment. And that's really what I'm trying to convey here. In terms of other people's reactions, no, people are more interested than they are frightened, I've found.
Define sociopath for people here who are like, I'm here because I heard the word and I'm intrigued.
I'm going to simplify it. A sociopath is someone who struggles to learn the social emotions. So there are inherent emotions. We're all born with them. They're sort of hardwired. Things like sadness, joy, surprise, disgust, anticipation. These are factory settings, for lack of a better word. But then there are the learned social emotions. Empathy, compassion, pride, jealousy, shame, guilt. These are not inherent. They are taught, usually through modeling. And a sociopath is someone who struggles to understand and internalize those emotions. We can learn them. We just struggle to learn them. And in the book, I refer to it as an emotional learning disability, because I remember having a kid in a class of mine who struggled to read, and I remember thinking, this is sort of how I feel about emotion. It's sort of like having glasses. I can get the social emotions, but I have to really squint. It takes me harder than most. And what happens is, as a child, I understood that I was different. I understood that I didn't have these social emotions. I didn't have these social skills. But I also understood at a very early age that acknowledging that was met almost universally negatively. So I learned how to charm and manipulate and lie very, very early as a coping mechanism that, left unchecked, developed into a lifestyle.
So let's talk about the beginning. You noticed that you didn't think you were feeling the same way, reacting the same way.
Right.
Even before, you're old enough to have a vocabulary to understand it could be some type of disorder. You just started seeing it. What did you see? What did you feel?
I had a younger sister, so I understood what complex emotional development looked like, even though I wouldn't have described it in those terms. So I saw that my sister was very receptive to guilt and shame. Even now, she can't even lie about a dinner reservation. Her face turns beet red and she starts to shake and sweat. And I saw that in her. I saw that in my classmates. I remember having conversations with my mom, and she would try to sort of get me to understand why it's important to help the teacher like you. Being quiet allows you to move forward. Being polite. These are ways to succeed in society. And all the other kids just somehow got that, and I didn't. And I think in order for a child to be successfully socialized, that child has to care what other people think about them, and I didn't. And but I remember seeing myself in the descriptives of sociopathy, and I remember also looking up examples and only seeing the most heinous examples and thinking, so is this just what happens? Am I a foregone conclusion? Because I never felt bad. The destructive things that I did, looking back, I was using destructive behavior as a coping mechanism to deal with the apathy, the discomfort that I had with apathy. And I really found hope, as strange as it might sound, when I finally did receive my diagnosis. I like to joke like only a sociopath would be thrilled at that diagnosis. But I remember thinking, okay, there's a name for who I am. There are other people who share my diagnosis. There are at least enough other people to justify a diagnosis. So understanding that really helped me start to get a handle on my destructive behavior.
So apathy is big in your memoir. Same with something you call stuck stress. Mm-hmm. Explain what it's like in your mind, in the way that you're feeling, maybe not feeling is maybe a better way to put it, when you're kind of just living and trying to be normal, as you would say in here? What does it feel like? And then why was it that doing something usually bad, as seen by society, would take you out of that?
Apathy, it's different because apathy as I experience it today, it's not that it's different, it's that I understand it differently. So a lot of people like to say, oh, sociopaths don't feel. That's not true. We feel inherent emotions. We feel sadness. We feel joy. We feel the same emotions that everyone feels inherently. It's really just the social emotions that we struggle with. So as a child, I remember feeling nothing. So it felt sort of like what those decompression chambers feel like, where you're just kind of floating. There's nothing really pulling you in any direction. But I understood that acknowledging that was the quickest way to get into trouble. And I think I referenced this in the book. They say the truth shall set you free. That has never been the case for me, at least not until now. Now it's fine, I don't care. But as a kid, I remember thinking, I'm not going to tell you the truth. Like, no way. Like, this is...
Well, and you tried it, right? And
I did. I tried, but I learned real quick. Like, nope. Like, the best way to move forward is just to keep my head down and act like all the other kids. But the stuck stress that I experienced, what I understand now, is that the stuck stress was not a reaction to apathy, per se. It was a reaction to others' perceptions of apathy. So if I would start to feel apathetic, I would think someone's going to notice and they're going to single you out and you will become othered, and these perks of society to which you want access will become immediately taken from you. So you have to act like all the other kids. You have to fake feeling. And I turned to destructive behavior as a way to get these jolts of feeling. I've been asked why it's only destructive behavior and not altruism or acts of kindness that created those jolts of emotion. And the best answer I can come up with is that because I didn't care what other people thought of me, praise never really mattered. Being rewarded didn't matter. So I didn't get that emotional jolt from acts of kindness the way I did from acts of deviance.
Let's talk about some of the acts of deviance. I've just read this, so I feel, I know so much about you, obviously. But I'm just like, yeah, you broke into people's houses routinely and stole cars routinely. You can, I think, pretty comfortably pick any lock, most locks.
Not anymore. They're all electric, which is good for me, truthfully.
For people who haven't read this, tell us about some of those deviant acts and why you did them.
Well, when I was a kid, I did what I could, age appropriately. As a child, I remember stealing backpacks, and I remember not even wanting the backpack. A lot of times I would just take these things and throw them into the bushes. It was the act of deviance that I was chasing, not the contents of things. And I remember breaking into my neighbor's house. My mom had asked me to go and get something, and they weren't home, and I just tried one of the doors, and it opened. And I remembered feeling, for once, the equilibrium of this silent house matched, the external matched the internal. And that was really my first taste of, I like this. So I'm not only getting this equilibrium, but I'm also getting that jolt, that emotional jolt that I'm seeking. As I got older, the behavior started to get worse. But I always intentionally chose crimes that could be explained or that would result in a potential slap on the wrist. I was always very aware of the way that I looked. I was aware that I was a white woman, and I knew that we, as a group, tend to get away with things much simpler. I remember breaking into a house one time and walking out of it as the residents were coming home, and it was the first time that had ever happened. And I saw them pull up into the driveway as I was walking out, and I remember thinking, I'm just going to walk out of their house, and I'm going to walk down the street, and they're not going to stop me. And they didn't. And that's entirely because I look the way I do, and the circumstances would have been much different had my gender, race, or socioeconomic background been different. And the behavior continued to escalate until it reached a point where I understood that it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. I would eventually be arrested for the things that I was doing, and I wanted to lead a life that wasn't held back by a criminal record. And so I started trying to experiment with other things that could give me the release I was seeking without engaging in destructive behavior.
And I think to clarify, just to really like kind of drill down on the emotional affect of it, the jolt, correct me if I'm wrong, like it would be for me. Oh my gosh, I'm in a house, it's not mine. The police are going to come. I'm stressed. I'm scared. Get me out of here. Oh, I kind of did something. That was crazy. That wasn't it.
No. You
didn't have any of that.
No. If anything, it felt like a spa visit, which sounds insane, and I understand that. but I would go into a house that wasn't mine, and I would just relax. And I treated these homes with a great deal of reverence. A lot of people have asked, you had to have taken something. I can't ever recall ever doing that. Because I just wouldn't. I just wanted to exist somewhere. I knew I wasn't supposed to exist. And when I left those homes, I didn't stay very long usually. And when I left those homes, I noticed that I felt so much less stress. I felt normal. And by that, I mean I wasn't constantly feeling the need to break into homes and steal cars.
And you refer to those, it's almost like it was a prescription for you.
Yeah.
Doing something like that for you was a way to treat yourself.
Well, I had read a study. I was at UCLA, and I had read this study about how today someone like me would receive a diagnosis of secondary psychopathy. So the primary psychopath is believed to suffer from brain abnormalities that make it impossible for them to move through complex emotional development. So while they have the inherent emotions, they are not capable of learning the social emotions. Whereas a secondary psychopath has all of the inherent emotions and does have that potential to move through complex emotional development. We learn differently, but it's possible for us. And I remember reading a study on how people who have secondary psychopathy have higher than normal ranges of anxiety, which I found really interesting because the primary sociopath or psychopath won't have any anxiety. And I remember thinking, if I were to treat this the way that I would treat anxiety, I would figure out the things that work for me and I would put myself on a schedule. I figured that smaller but routine acts of disciplined deviance were probably more effective and in the long run safer than the larger spontaneous ones, because I noticed I would have these feelings of pressure, this anxiety, so to speak. It would rise, and if I waited too long to do something about it, I would end up being sloppy and careless and far more destructive than I needed to be. So yeah, I put myself on what I called a destructive prescription, where I would engage in these smaller acts of disciplined deviance. And I noticed that over time, the anxiety driving a lot of the behavior started to reduce greatly.
When you were diagnosed, in the book you talk about, first of all, it just really is something that this is no longer really recognized. It's not in the DSM. You had to search and search and search for research to even understand what you thought was going on with you.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know this, explain, there's antisocial personality disorder, there's psychopathy, there's sociopathy, which now is not really used.
It's not even, yes. It's tricky because I understand that the book is called Sociopath, but it's psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder.
And why is that? And what did that mean for you in your journey in determining what was going on with you?
And this is something that I struggle with even now, that's the conflation between psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. There's a lot of, disinformation and this belief that they're the same. They're not the same. With antisocial personality disorder, you're going to see a lot of arrests. You're going to see juvenile delinquency. You're going to see a lot of suspensions, expulsions, lack of impulse control. And that was not me. And that is also not, doesn't really correlate with those who share my personality type. Those are going to be the career criminals, the individuals for whom course correction is not an option. They don't seem to have the ability to predict consequence, whereas I always could. They don't have the ability, it seems, to hold down jobs or go to school. And I was always, when I needed to be, fiercely responsible. So they're very, very separate, but behaviorally they can be very similar, which is why I think there's so much confusion. And I think what's going on is, I was actually speaking with, he's the president of the, and I'm going to say this because it's a mouthful, the Society for the Scientific Study of Psychopathy. And he and I were talking last week, and we both sort of landed on the same thing, which is, I think for a long time, the mental health industry has just sort of been dancing around what this is, and they're trying to call it different things: conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder, because the stigma is so great. Nobody wants a kid diagnosed with conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder, which is what children are diagnosed with now. You can't diagnose a child with psychopathy. And then now they're even toying with the idea of making oppositional defiant and conduct disorder lifespan diagnostics instead of just calling it what it is. And that's frustrating for me, understanding that there is research that indicates that this is something that can be treated early, and that it's not being treated early, because in order to diagnose something, you have to be able to identify it. And right now, nobody wants that diagnosis because it's too stigmatizing. But in refusing the diagnosis, you're also blocking yourself from treatment.
Absolutely. When you were diagnosed, tell us what that test is like. You say it was hours, it was exhausting.
Because it's not a straightforward test. It's a conversation. It can be done in a smaller amount of time, but depending on the clinician, it's a conversation during which the clinician is getting the answers that they need for this test. It's not like you sit down and they ask you.
It's not like multiple choice, yeah.
No, and also because you could fake it so easy in either direction. So it's just you sit there, and the longer it takes, in my opinion, the more accurate it is, because then you're really getting into stories, and you're really getting into, what this person is like and what they're willing to share. And from that, they go through, and then they're able to assess. It's just yes or no, and it's scaled 0, 1, 2. The highest you can score is a 40. And I just remember thinking it was insane when I found out that a neurotypical person is going to score a 6. And I remember thinking, so if you're a psychopath, you're scoring between a 30 and a 40. What's going on between 6 and 29? Yeah. And it's like, oh, I don't know. We don't worry about that. Like, shouldn't you? But yeah.
Which is where you fell.
Yep. I hovered right at the cutoff. And since there's a margin of error, I was right at the cutoff.
So in some ways, like for people who hear the word sociopath, and here we are having a conversation, you were not arrested, but you have shared here and in your book.
I should have been.
You've broken into houses. People obviously also associate this with things far worse than that. Mm-hmm. Is it sort of this sliding scale, and where that number goes, is that indicative of how bad someone's actions may become?
I think what should be investigated is what's motivating the behavior. So for me, that I don't remember. I'm certainly, or maybe a couple times, but certainly never when I broke into a home. It was never motivated by malice, wanting to harm. Like that wasn't in my thought process. I would focus more on that, on the internal emotional experience. How do you experience emotion? And that's something when people have asked me about their children, how do I talk to my kids about this? Start with asking them, how do you experience emotion? And no pearl clutching allowed. Like allow these kids the space to say, I don't really feel bad when I do bad things. One thing I've recommended a lot is the latest iteration of Wednesday Addams, the Wednesday series, which, make no mistake, Wednesday Addams checks every single one of the criteria for the psychopathic checklist. But in my opinion, it's a more complete composite because you're also talking about somebody who is capable of loyalty, is capable of making those connections with individuals. It takes her a little bit longer. She's slow to warm up, but she can do it. She grieves the loss of her pet when it's taken from her. She has these experiences of emotion. She just doesn't get to them the same way as her neurotypical friends do. And I have suggested that parents open the conversation by sitting down, because kids, don't get to see depictions of an antisocial person or a psychopathic person in a positive light. It's always serial killers and axe murderers, and I get it. To a certain extent, this personality type lends itself to those types of individuals, but it also lends itself to so much more.
And in fact, 5%? right? Of people?
Yeah, and if you think about it, when you consider that the diagnostic interviews for psychopathy mostly take place within the prison system, there's no way that number isn't higher. But even if we were just talking about 5% of the population, that is an astonishing number of people. And yet, when you walk into any bookstore, there's nothing on the shelves for sociopathy or psychopathy. There are books for individuals who believe they have been victims of psychopaths. But there are no self-help books. There's no treatment options or support groups. And I recently read a study that viewing someone as antisocial or psychopathic reduces empathy in a neurotypical person, which I found so fascinating. And that would also explain why there aren't more resources dedicated to the psychopathic personality. Because if a neurotypical person, when presented with that person, automatically experiences a decrease in empathy, whether they realize it or not, I just think that's really fascinating. You're essentially treating psychopaths the way you perceive you're treating psychopaths the way you're perceiving a psychopath is treating you. Absolutely. Without empathy.
Yeah. What do you want to see change in the understanding of it, I guess societally, but more importantly, just how confusing this medical diagnosis is?
I would like to see normalization, not of destructive behavior, but of internal emotional flat affect is something that a lot of psychopaths feel they need to always mask for. They always have to put on these emotions that they don't feel. How about just normalizing that not everyone feels things the same way? And I've said this before, there's nothing inherently immoral about having limited access to social emotion. It's not how we feel, it's what we do. And the behavior, the destructive behavior, increases at the age of 18 to 30 or so, and then it starts to decrease. But if we could intervene sooner, if we could give children the space to admit that they don't really care the way that their friends do, that they don't emote the way that they're supposed to, I think that those children would not feel as though they needed to act out the way that they do now.
And when it comes to the medical community, I mean, it feels like there are vocabulary there is resources set aside for disorders that affect way fewer people, are maybe way more niche than the people that fall between 6 and 29.
I think I was talking with someone who worked in the prison system, and she was very frustrated because she said, no one likes to give these diagnoses because as soon as you receive a psychopathic diagnosis, you're considered irredeemable. Like that goes in your file, like just lock them up and throw away the key, essentially. Wow. And that's, considering we're talking about a personality disorder that affects so many people, the idea that we've just decided that they're irredeemable is just wild to me. And I think that, in having this conversation, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, well, if you don't have constructs like shame and guilt, what's to stop you from stealing from people and murdering people? And I say, I steal from people all the time, as much as I want. And the amount that I want to do that is 0. I murder people as much as I want. And the amount that I want to do that is 0. The idea that we need constructs like shame and guilt and remorse to keep us from harming one another, to quote Penn Jillette, who said it way better than I could, he said that is the most damning argument I can imagine. And I feel the same way. It's like you think that the only thing that's keeping you from murdering everyone in this room is shame, remorse, or guilt. Like, no, that you don't need these. They're nice safety nets, but they're not fail-safe. And I think that having limited access to those emotions shouldn't be an automatic stigmatizer.
I do want to talk a lot about how kind of the other side of the coin that is some of the positives, but in just a moment. First, what did work for you? Because eventually you decided breaking into houses for the rest of my life isn't the way to keep this in check.
That was going to be tough to explain to a partner. It was, for me, what worked was what I just said. As soon as I understood that the way that I was feeling it bad, it was just different. Once I understood that my internal world was normal for the type of person that I was, I would say that took 80% of the air out of the balloon. It was like, okay, all right, so this is not, I'm not crazy, or if I am, I'm not, irredeemable. And once I understood that, once I was no longer trying to figure out that part of me, it was really just the same types of modalities that work for people who suffer from depression, suffer from anxiety. Cognitive behavioral interventions were really effective for me because they stopped the behavior. So when you're dealing with somebody that's engaging in destructive behavior of any sort, whether it's cutting, whether it's bulimia, eating disorders, you stop the behavior first and then you explore it. So that worked for me. I wanted to stop these destructive behaviors and sort of explore what came up when I wasn't using them as a coping mechanism. And cognitive behavioral therapy really, really worked. And I have been seeing that there are other young women on TikTok who identify as antisocial and psychopathic, and they have shared similar success stories in therapy. This isn't groundbreaking work. It's the same type of stuff that millions of people benefit from for other mental disorders. And talk therapy. Once I got the behavior in check, sort of going back and dismantling my childhood understanding, how I learned these things, why I learned these things, it just put it into perspective for me. So I was able to isolate the irrational belief systems. For example, if I don't go out and steal this car, the pressure's only going to get worse, and then I could end up killing someone. And the counter thought to that is, yeah, that's a concern, but that's never actually happened, and you are very, very capable of discipline and controlling yourself. So if you don't go out and steal this car, perhaps there are other coping mechanisms that are just as effective that won't lead to violence or hurting someone else.
Were you really scared that if you didn't release the pressure, as you say it would lead to that?
Yeah. I think it went back to that foregone conclusion, like seeing myself in the characteristics at a young age and seeing the word sociopath associated with the Ted Bundy examples. It was, okay, so did he just wake up one day and start killing people? Probably not. It probably started small and built. And isn't that exactly what I'm doing? I started small and I'm building and I'm building and I'm building. So where does it stop? So I never had that bloodlust. I never had that desire to hurt others, but I assaulted a child when I was a kid, and I remember where that came from. It just came from being in a space where the pressure was really intense, and I made a choice that was the wrong choice, and I didn't feel badly about it, and there was no guarantee that something like that wouldn't happen again as an adult.
CBT, for people who don't know, tell some of the tactics that did work for you. Because I can imagine, like, when you're in this position where you found something that does work, which is not something you can keep doing, these illegal acts. This is not a condition like, let's say, depression, where there is a pill you take for it.
No. Mm-hmm.
This is not something that's going to change sort of some of the wiring that makes you this way. So what was it like to find CBT, and what is it? Because you talk about it like journaling. Like, tell us how you actually went through it.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially just, it's a common sense approach to therapy. So certainly talk therapy, Freudian analysis is great, but it takes years, and whereas CBT, a lot of it is exercise driven. So cognitive journaling was something that I really liked, which is when you feel an urge to commit, in my case, a destructive behavior, you write down, I want to break into this house across the street. Why do you want to break into this house? Because if I don't, I'm going to do something worse tomorrow. Where's the proof of that? Like, it forces you to really break down the urges and face them head on, as opposed to just getting carried away by the compulsion. And that's what it felt like. It felt very much like a compulsion. Another one I really liked was flooding, which is when you put yourself in, for me, a destructive, provoking environment, and then you force yourself to sit in it. And going to these places which normally would elicit a destructive behavior on my part. Instead of doing that, I would sit in it, and then I would record, how do you feel when you sit in it? Describe exactly what it's like, describe exactly what comes up, and it's just forcing yourself to really pay attention to everything that is coming up when you're dealing with destructive behavior. And a lot of it is exercise-driven. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to cognitive behavioral therapy, theoretically, which I really responded to.
Is there any concern of glorification of the word or of the condition?
Yeah. Listen, and that was one of my concerns when I was writing, is the last thing I want to do is romanticize psychopathy. This is a dangerous mental condition, the traits associated with which are potentially dangerous and violent. What I want people to understand is that only makes up a small percentage of the story. These extreme examples, I believe the last time I checked, they make up 0.01% of the population, the serial killer examples. It's the nuance of the disorder that I was trying to shed a light on, that it's, everyone wants to throw psychopaths into the, ex-boyfriend bin of, mental disorders. And I get that. But when you're thinking about it from a parental perspective, children who are struggling with this, that's when it's less funny. That's when it's less convenient to just throw them in the dumpster. And if we haven't seen that kid, we know that kid. The kid that's acting out. That child isn't just waking up that morning and making those decisions. There's something going on. And this is what's going on. And at the risk of glorifying it, my hope was that the benefit of shedding light on treatment options for kids would outweigh the potential of glorifying sociopathy and psychopathy. And again, to be clear, it's never a good idea to engage in destructive behavior. I know that. I knew that. I knew right from wrong very, very early on. It's getting into the motivation of it. And that's never really discussed. Why are you doing these things? Take me through the process. This compulsion you feel, where does it come from? These are the conversations we should be having, not just with kids, but with adults too.
Speaking of boyfriends, in your case, boyfriend turned husband, you are married, you have kids, and as you've said, you had to learn love. What was that? I mean, if you've read the book, I know it was a roller coaster with David in particular, your husband who is here. But how did that work? Getting into a romantic relationship with your emotional set.
It worked. It seems like it worked very similarly to the neurotypical experience of love. It wasn't as emotional for me, which sounds nuts, but it was very matter of fact. I met my husband, and I knew instantly that I was going to marry him, but it wasn't these sweeping butterflies. It wasn't any of that. But this was someone around whom I felt I could disclose my deepest, darkest secrets. This is somebody around whom I felt safe. This is somebody around whom I felt like a better person. And when I've spoken to neurotypical individuals, it sounds like that's very, very similar. It's not as emotional for me, meaning those highs and lows. That's not where I fall. That is where my husband falls. He's very Italian, and he has all every emotion under the rainbow. But I think we balance each other because, he runs hot, I run cold, and it works. So and again, all I have is my experience of love. And it is different from the neurotypical experience, but it's also quite relatable. When I talk to people about how, my relationship with my husband, there's never any, oh, really? That seems weird. It's like, oh, I get that. Yeah, that's relatable. It was like, just turn the volume down. That's how it felt, which doesn't mean that I felt less about him. It was that the way that I experienced those emotions wasn't as loud, if that makes any sense.
And how is parenting when I'm assuming your kids know you've stolen some cars and broken into some homes?
Yeah, those are fun conversations. My kids are young. I try to, share transparently and age appropriately. But this is a conversation that I've been having my whole life with members of my family, my friends. So the idea of sociopathy was never completely foreign to them. And I try to relate it to things that they're experiencing. So it's, and they get it. They understand that I don't have those emotional reactions. We were talking about this before. Excitement, nervousness, those things don't register. But I wish that they did sometimes. There have been times, especially in this process with the book, where I see like someone standing outside of department store glass. I get the gravity of the moment. I get the gravity of the opportunity. I just don't feel it. And that's a time where I'll tell my kids, like, this is one of those times where mommy isn't able to experience these things. And that elicits empathy in them so that they understand my personality type from an emotional place and not just from a destructive place. Yes, or behavioral place. Yes, they know, my older one anyway does know, about some of the things that I've done. But he also knows that they weren't the right choices and that it's not something that he would ever want to do, because I'm fortunate. My child is terrified of getting caught. He's terrified of being in trouble. So, and that's how I explain it. It's like, see, mommy didn't have that. So I had to learn to make decisions based on an external philosophy, whereas you get to make decisions based on an internal philosophy and an external philosophy. So he understands it on those, in that sense.
And in that way, that other side of the coin, and I liked when we get to the part in the book where you start to reference it as this superpower, and other people point that out to you. I can't imagine. It feels like, what could I accomplish if I wasn't worried what somebody else would think about it? What would I accomplish if I wasn't feeling shameful about something? Now, have you grasped that? Do you kind of use that and feel that?
Yeah, and I really, I remember talking with my best friend who struggles so much with guilt, and my sister as well, and kind of understanding early on, like, that's not helping. Like, this sounds awful. Guilt sounds terrible. It sounds like the most horrific.
It's just amazing that's what it is. It sounds terrible. Can you imagine?
It's like, and I understand it. I understand it cognitively, and certainly I've been able to grow certain empathic responses. I remember thinking about, at one point, other people, other sociopathic individuals, and I'm thinking, like, what are they doing? Like, gosh, how are they keeping themselves in check? I feel bad for them. And I was like, oh, I feel bad for them. Like, this is what empathy is supposed to be, right? And I was like, okay, so if I can feel bad for them, maybe I can feel bad for other people. So in that way, I've learned to grow these, but guilt and shame, I haven't grown those because I don't want to grow those.
Yeah, they sound, why try?
Like, no, sounds like a hellscape, truthfully.
I'm going to open this up to questions in just a minute, so start thinking about those. I have 2 questions. Well, I have a million more questions, but I'll limit myself to 2 more. One, if you could wake up and not be a sociopath, would you?
No. Sorry. I should have faked a pause on that one. Let me think about that. No, I wouldn't. I understand that the tools I have in my kit are not the same as the tools that neurotypical people have in theirs. And for a long time, I wanted to be like everyone else. But I think ultimately, looking back, what I realized is, no, I actually didn't. What I wanted was the freedom to be myself. And because I was not offered that freedom, I felt compelled to be like other individuals. But honestly, I really love apathy. I was joking with someone not long ago that, people in LA spend thousands of dollars going on wellness retreats and meditation retreats, and it's to sort of block out negative, self-talk. And I'm like, yeah, I have that. That just happens on its own.
Free.
I like that I don't care what people think, which is not the same thing as not caring if you hurt someone. Because if I hurt someone that I love, I might not have that like shame or intense guilt about it, but I don't like that. It's like, oh, I don't want this person that I care about to feel negatively about something I've said or done. But that isn't the same as not caring what people think, like chatter, or if someone at a cocktail party doesn't like me, like, okay, like I'm okay with that. So I don't think I would change it.
Yeah. Last question is just the response from other people who maybe see this word and they're maybe in a bookstore and they're like, I've been feeling a certain way. They read this. Are you hearing from people? It seems like a real resource, given the fact that this isn't even technically a word or diagnosis that's being used right now.
I get it every single day. Every single morning when I wake up, I'm flooded with messages from people who are saying just that they just wanted, representation matters, and they didn't have any representation, so they feel less hopeless. And that's really all I wanted. I am always so grateful to hear from them, because I remember feeling that way. I would have loved a resource just to make me feel less alone in the world. And if nothing else, these people understand I'm not alone, and it's okay that I don't feel things the way my partner does. And this, my experience has given them the language to express themselves and explain themselves in a way that they weren't before. It's just been overwhelming. The only parts of that exchange I don't like are when I hear from parents who are desperate for help for their kids, and I don't have anything to offer other than just what I did, And that's what I'm really hoping will change, that I'll be able to say, yes, call this doctor at this place, try this modality, I found this to be particularly effective, or this clinic is doing a lot of work in this department. Like, that's what I want ultimately to come from this.
Yeah, well, that's how it starts, absolutely. Let's open it up to questions. I'll go right here.
Thank you so much. I read your book, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for coming and opening up your life to us. I'm thinking, as a mom of 4 neurodivergent kids, about similarities with dyslexia and learning disabilities, and how I was able to help diagnose them through symptoms that I was seeing in school. So I'm thinking about diagnosing young children, and I'm thinking a lot about your mom and how she helped you through this process. And she sounds pretty cool, that she was able to be patient with you and to help you through, and that you were, I think she was a safe place for you. Sorry, I'm too much. Are there diagnostic tools for smaller children? I know it's a social, emotional, learned, not learned. Did she see a difference in you and your sister as a baby? Like with your eye contact, or your smiling or cooing, or?
No. I've had very extensive conversations with her about that, in terms of, how I was as an infant, as opposed to how my sister was. I can tell you that I had a great deal more medical issues than my sister did. I was in the hospital a lot as a kid, but in terms of eye contact, smiling, connecting, no, that didn't seem to be an issue. It really was, and like so many kids, it starts with behavior. Behavior is what you notice first, and also just the socialization. My mom likes to laugh about this time that she was going over like a spelling test that I hadn't done very well on, and she kept saying, well, how about this word? Do you know how to spell this word? And she could tell I was getting exasperated, and she goes, are you struggling to spell? And I said, Mommy, do you know what these words say? And she said, yeah. And I said, then who cares? and she likes to laugh about it, but now she's like, oh, that was probably a good indicator. Not that I was a bad kid, but, I'm not motivated by praise or grades or the teacher's admiration. It was, why do I have to get a good grade? Well, because you want the teacher to like you. I mean, okay, but I don't really. It's fine if she doesn't. It's no big deal. People are people. Well, you want to get into college. I'll figure it out. Like, it wasn't, I didn't have that cause and effect, whereas my sister was, the idea of her teacher not liking her was a death sentence. And I didn't experience it that way.
Yes.
Hi. I totally appreciate this. I've been interested. I read the reviews of your book. I'm a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and I actually take care of a different stigmatized group of people who are mostly narcissists. So 2 questions for you. I'm really struck by the the apathy that you were talking about and what the behavior would give you in terms of a jolt. And I would like you to explain that a little bit better. I wondered if it meant getting away with something. And then, so you can elaborate on that. But the second question is, what are the emotions you struggle with?
I'll do the second one first. So it's empathy, compassion, which are sort of the same, shame. Oh, the ones I don't like having?
The way some neurotypical don't like having shame and guilt. Do you have ones that bother you?
I don't think so. But I have a really small vocabulary. Because I was going to say, well, I guess sadness. It's like, no, because you need sadness. And I don't really have a temper. So, and when I do get angry, it's, you know, I'm trying to think. Disgust, maybe. I find that sometimes when disgust kicks in, it's sort of, it's over. Like, I can't, if I'm disgusted by someone or something, it's really hard to get back. And I don't like that. Like, and that's something I've noticed in myself. Once something clicks, it's like I have no say in it. Like, I've been in situations with someone where they've been talking to me, and these are people that some of these people are family members, some of these people are like lifelong friends, and something will just click where I'm like, I'm never going to speak to you again. And I know it when it happens, and I'm like, oh, no. Like, but I can't, it's like, and it's over. Like, I mean, it's over. But that's good, because I know that there are a lot of people who, like with ex-boyfriends, they can't let go, and I don't have that. But to your first question, I think in retrospect, when I would do these things and get away with it, it was certainly like this gratification of like, yes, I got away with it, and this is amazing, and it feels powerful. But what it really felt was authentic. It was more to me like, this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing, and nobody gets to have any opinions on it. So it was this, it sounds like rebellion, but what it really was just me wanting to be in a space where I could just be completely myself. And which is why I think I don't have those urges as much anymore, because I am myself all the time. So, or most of the time anyway. So I don't have those. So if I were to break into a house tonight, I would be like, I would probably feel very much the same as I did outside of the house. So there's no impetus for me to commit the behavior anymore. But working with narcissists, that's so incredible. And it's another stigmatized group of individuals for whom there is no empathy extended. And the behavior is a large cause of that. But ultimately, narcissism stems from, and stop me if I'm wrong, it stems from just the deepest, most primal of wounds, does it not? Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to feel sorry for someone when they're exhibiting such destructive behavior, but that is a group for whom I think empathy is overdue.
I'll take one back there.
You've talked a lot about all of the struggles, but one of the things I think of is you must have freedom from fear, and I'm wondering when that has really helped you. I think about, those of us who sort of buckle down in a crisis but later feel the emotions. But I wonder for you, are there times where you realize, wow, this is great, I don't have to struggle?
My issue with fear has usually been the opposite. And I have fear. It's not that I don't, it's just muted, but I have found that that's gotten me into more trouble than it has. It's been more of a hindrance than a help. I've done a lot of really destructive, crazy things because I haven't had the benefit of fear holding me back. There have been times where I should have not jumped off that cliff or walked into
Followed that man to that van.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, fear is dicey because, and this is interestingly enough in this process with the book, talking to my husband, I rely on him to be fear for me because I'll agree to all sorts of stuff, and he'll come in and say, no, we're not going to go to that stranger's home and have coffee with them. Like, that's not what's going to happen. I'm like, but I'm sure it's fine. Who cares? He's like, well, I care, so we're not going to do that. Yeah, there are times where it's. I guess I think if I had a lot of fear, I probably wouldn't have written this book. That's something, and that's another place where my husband was really helpful, because, I mean, the manuscript was 200,000 words when I turned it in, and it had so many things, so many stories in it that my husband was like, I will burn this whole house to the ground with everything in it if you show this to anyone but me.
There's some people that toe that line still. So wow, I wonder what else.
And he's like, I remember one time him walking in, he's like, is this a joke? And I'm like, no. He's like, you can't show this to anyone else. And I was like, why? He's like, because you'll be arrested. I was like, well, okay. I mean, whatever. If it happens, it happens. And he's like, no. Like, no. So I guess I'm fortunate to have someone that can serve as my fear surrogate.
Can I do one more? Okay, I'm going to do one more. We are so out of time, but everybody's loving this. Go ahead.
I'm Kurt Malkoff. I'm a practicing clinical psychologist like yourself.
I'm not practicing, so you get the benefit of that.
Okay. But with that said, I think to really understand your story, you have to listen to it. And I read constantly, but I purposely listen to your narrative, and it's special. I mean, you get a real sense of your presentation here, but you don't get that if you read this book. You want to listen to this book.
Thank you.
And one other thing. Do you ever see yourself being in a position like Marsha Linehan with, borderline personality, where she put together DBT, and you can create a therapeutic modality to really address this issue?
I would love to do something like that. And
I think you have the capacity to do that.
I would love to. I would want the issue with me. I mean, listen, I identify myself as someone not to be trusted, I think, on maybe the first sentence, if not the first paragraph.
I think so.
So and I understand that. Part of telling this book was being completely honest about the fact that I am an inconvenient narrator in a lot of senses, or in a lot of aspects of it. So I would like to partner with someone that can help me do that, because there are a lot of people who, for whom trust is tough with me, and I completely get that. But I would love nothing more than to take my experience and use it to develop a series of treatment options that I believe could be incredibly successful, not just from my own experience, but from speaking with other clinicians, other people who work with members of the primary psychopaths, secondary psychopaths, antisocial personality disorder. I mean, it's really, especially kids. As for the narration, what's interesting about that is when I hear from people who read the book, they come at it from a darker place, like, oh, this was serious, and the people that listen to it come to it from a lighter place. And I think that's because when you're reading something, you're projecting so much of your own, ideas of things that I'm conveying and saying. But when you're listening to me say it, a lot of the stories that I'm delivering them with humor and levity, which isn't to say that the things that I'm discussing should be taken lightly, but there are some heinous people depicted in this book. And I think that some of the stories are easier to swallow when they're given with a little bit of, what a bitch, am I right? Like, little humor.
Ginny.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking of the dog lover.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Patric Gagne, thank you very much. This was really enlightening. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
What a fantastic conversation.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.